Hello everyone, welcome to my GMB News 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. When the news broke in July 2025, it felt less like a headline and more like the quiet shattering of something people had come to believe in. For years, and had been more than just a celebrity couple, they were a symbol of balance, of humor meeting warmth, of two worlds somehow finding harmony. And yet, as their joint statement confirmed their separation after 12 years of marriage, fans were left searching for answers in the spaces between carefully chosen words. The beginning, a spark in the spotlight. Their story began in 2002, under the bright lights of. Back then, neither of them could have predicted how deeply their lives would intertwine. Kat was vibrant, quick-witted, effortlessly charming, a presenter who could command a stage without seeming to try. Patrick, on the other hand, brought a different energy, grounded, sharp, with a comedian's instinct for reading people and moments. They worked together easily. There was laughter, the kind that didn't need rehearsing. But timing, as it often does, kept things from going further. For nearly a decade, they remained in each other's orbit, not quite close, but never fully distant either. The turning point, a flight across the Atlantic in 2011, something shifted. Patrick boarded a plane from Belfast to Los Angeles. It wasn't for work, not for publicity, but for a birthday brunch. Kat's birthday. That moment would later be described as the turning point. It wasn't grand in the way celebrity romances are often portrayed. There were no flashing cameras, no orchestrated declarations. Just a man deciding that distance, thousands of miles of it, was no longer enough to keep him away. From that point on, their relationship moved quickly, but not recklessly. It felt intentional, as if both of them understood that this was something rare. A private promise in Rome in 2012, they married in a quiet ceremony in Rome. No spectacle, no circus, just vows, exchanged in a city that has witnessed centuries of love stories, some enduring, some fleeting, all deeply human. Friends described it as intimate and sincere. It reflected who they were as a couple, private, grounded, uninterested in turning their love into a performance. Soon after, their family grew. 2 sons, Milo and James, became the center of their world. For a time, everything seemed aligned. 2 careers, 2 worlds, but beneath the surface, something more complex was unfolding. Kat's career had already begun its meteoric rise years earlier when she became the host of In 2006. That role changed everything. It wasn't just a job, it was a transformation. She became a global face, moving seamlessly between entertainment industries, hosting major events, appearing on networks like Fox and CNN, even stepping into pop culture history with a cameo on The Simpsons. Los Angeles became her professional home. Her world expanded, fast, bright, demanding. Patrick's journey, though equally respectable, followed a different rhythm. He built his career steadily in the UK and Ireland, earning admiration as a comedian and presenter. In 2023, he reached a defining milestone, becoming the host of. He called it, the honor of a lifetime. And he meant it, but there was a quiet contrast between their paths, one that would later become harder to ignore. The weight of imbalance in interviews. Patrick sometimes spoke with disarming honesty. Once, he described himself as feeling like a junior shareholder in their partnership. It wasn't said bitterly, not angrily, just truthfully. To outsiders, it might have sounded like a passing comment, but within it lay something deeper, a recognition of imbalance. Not necessarily in love, but in lifestyle, in decision-making, in the gravitational pull of their respective careers. Kat's professional world required visibility, travel, constant engagement. Under the soft glow of studio lights in Los Angeles, Kat Deeley smiled as the applause faded. Another show wrapped, another whirlwind day behind her. Yet, as the cameras dimmed, her thoughts drifted far across the ocean, to Ireland, where Patrick Kielty was likely finishing his own day. Their love story wasn't built on constant togetherness. Instead, it thrived in the spaces between, those quiet, stretching miles that somehow brought them closer. Friends often questioned it. How do you manage? They'd ask, brows furrowed with curiosity. Kat would simply laugh, a knowing sparkle in her eyes. Because to her, distance wasn't a weakness, it was their secret strength. There were moments, of course. Days when the small things became too loud, the way he teased her endlessly, or how she insisted on rearranging everything when she visited. "We start getting on each other's nerves," she once admitted with a playful honesty. "He starts to hate me, and I start to hate him." But that was where the magic lived. Because just as tension would begin to build, life would gently pull them apart again. Flights to catch, shows to host, commitments waiting on opposite sides of the world. And suddenly, the irritation would fade, replaced by something softer, longing. For about 10 days, they'd live their separate lives. Kat dazzling audiences on So You Think You Can Dance, Patrick charming crowds back home. Yet in quiet moments, between rehearsals or late-night scripts, they'd reach for their phones, just to hear each other's voice. And then came the reunions. Airports became their favorite places, not for the travel, but for the feeling of running back into each other's arms. In those moments, everything reset. The laughter returned, effortless and warm. The little annoyances, forgotten. What remained was the kind of love that felt renewed, like pressing restart on something truly precious. "It's the perfect scenario," Kat would say, her voice filled with certainty. And she meant it, because while others chased the idea of being inseparable, Kat and Patrick had discovered something different, something quietly powerful. Love didn't have to be constant to be strong. Sometimes, it needed space to breathe, to grow, to remind two people why they chose each other in the first place. And perhaps that was why so many of their friends felt a twinge of envy. Not because their relationship was easy, but because it was real, balanced, and beautifully their own. Dramatically, but steadily, over time. Career pressures, conflicting schedules, lifestyle differences, each factor, on its own, manageable. Together, overwhelming. What comes next? There are already whispers about what the future might hold. Patrick potentially returning more permanently to Ireland. Kat continuing to build her presence in UK television. But beyond speculation, one thing remains clear: their story isn't defined by its ending. It's defined by its honesty. A different kind of love story. Not all love stories end with forever. Some end with understanding, with respect, with the courage to say, "This was real, and now it has changed." For And, their journey wasn't a failure. It was a chapter, one filled with laughter, distance, growth, and ultimately, truth. And perhaps that's why it lingers in people's minds, not because it was perfect, but because it was. And yet, even after the headlines faded and the initial shock softened into quiet acceptance, their story continued to echo, not in tabloids, but in the hearts of those who had followed their journey for years. Because what people saw in it wasn't just glamour or success, it was something more grounded. Something familiar. The moments that still matter. Long before the separation, there were countless small, unrecorded moments that defined their relationship. Morning coffees shared before busy schedules pulled them in different directions. Late-night conversations after long flights, when exhaustion stripped away pretense and left only honesty. Family weekends where work was deliberately set aside, where Milo and James weren't the children of famous parents, but simply two boys laughing in a garden, their parents watching from the sidelines. These moments didn't disappear when the marriage ended. They remained, stitched into memory, untouched by change. The strength in letting go. There's a quiet strength in choosing to part ways without bitterness. No accusations, no public fallout. Just two people acknowledging that holding on too tightly can sometimes do more harm than letting go. For Patrick, that strength showed in his vulnerability, in the way he spoke openly, without defensiveness, about the challenges they faced. His words carried the weight of someone who had reflected deeply, who understood that relationships aren't undone by one mistake, but by a series of small misalignments over time. For Kat, it showed in her composure. Standing under the studio lights she continued to smile, to connect, to bring warmth into viewers' homes, even as her own life was shifting behind the scenes. That balance, between personal upheaval and professional grace, is not easy to maintain. And yet, She did. The children at the center through it all, one priority remained unchanged: their sons. Milo and James were not part of the headlines, and both Kat and Patrick made sure of that. Their statement, their actions, their silence on certain details, all pointed to a shared commitment to protecting their children from the noise that often surrounds celebrity separations. Because beyond careers, beyond geography, beyond personal differences, they were still parents. And that bond doesn't end. It evolves. The unspoken truth about timing: sometimes, love doesn't fail. Timing does. If they had met later, when their careers were more settled, if their professional worlds had been in the same place, if distance hadn't become routine, maybe things would have been different. Or maybe not, because life doesn't unfold in perfect conditions. It moves forward, unpredictably, asking people to make choices without guarantees. And for Anne, the choice they ultimately made was one of honesty, even when it was difficult. A story that doesn't end. It changes in the months following their separation. Both continued moving forward. Kat remained a central figure on, her presence as steady as ever, her connection with audiences undiminished. Patrick, deeply tied to his role on and his identity rooted in Ireland, seemed to lean into the parts of life that had always grounded him. Different paths, but not opposing ones, just separate. Why their story stays with us in the end, what makes their story linger, isn't the separation itself, it's the way it happened. No spectacle, no blame, just a quiet acknowledgement that sometimes, even the strongest connections can shift under the weight of real life. And maybe that's why people still think about them. Because in a world where relationships often end in chaos, theirs ended with something rare: dignity.